Millionaire pays a homeless woman to have a child, but when the baby was born, he was surprised by. Ethan Walker sat in the office of his luxurious penthouse, the city below glittering like a jewel set against the dark night. The muffled sounds of traffic and the pulsing streetlights couldn't distract him from the overwhelming pressure weighing on his mind. He was the public face of Walker Jewels, one of the largest jewelry chains in the country, an empire built over decades through the hard work and relentless vision of his father, Robert Walker. But for Ethan, inheriting the company wasn't a gift, it was a burden. Since taking over as president, he had faced constant criticism for being a distant leader, lacking the fiery determination his father was known for. The situation had worsened when Robert introduced an unexpected clause to ensure Ethan's worthiness to maintain control of the company. He needed to have a legitimate heir, a child who would symbolize the continuation of the Walker legacy. But life was far from simple for Ethan. After years of unsuccessful attempts, he discovered he was infertile. The revelation was devastating, shaking his sense of identity and his already fragile relationship with his father. Now, he carried a secret that threatened to destroy everything he had built. Despite his immaculate appearance and his reputation as one of the most eligible bachelors in high society, Ethan led a solitary life. His mansion was cold and silent, and his days were filled with endless meetings and empty nights. He had wealth, power, and status, but not the one thing he truly desired, a family to call his own. As he gazed at the skyline's reflection in the office window, Ethan pondered the decisions that had brought him to this point. He felt the weight of his father's expectations but also the frustration of not being accepted for who he really was. Robert's ultimatum wasn't just a corporate demand, it felt like a judgment of his worth as a son and a man. That night, something shifted within him. For the first time, Ethan began to consider possibilities he had never imagined. His mind, always logical and calculated, wandered down paths that challenged the boundaries of his ethics. He knew that if he wanted to retain control of the empire and somehow fulfill his longing to be a father, he would need to make a bold decision. But how far was he willing to go? As the clock struck midnight, Ethan left his office, his thoughts heavier than ever. He stepped into the crisp night air, hoping the short walk to his car would clear his mind. The streets were quieter than usual, a rare moment of calm in the bustling city. Yet, just as he approached the sleek black sedan waiting for him, something caught his eye. Near the side entrance of his flagship store, a figure sat huddled against the wall. The faint glow of the street lamp revealed a young woman, her face pale and her clothes worn and dirty. She clutched her rounded belly protectively, her posture weary but defiant. Ethan stopped, his curiosity piqued despite himself. The woman looked up, startled by his presence. Her green eyes, though tired, sparkled with a flicker of resilience. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she muttered defensively. Ethan crouched down to meet her gaze. "I didn't say you were," he replied, his tone softer than he intended. She looked away, her hands tightening around her stomach. "Just trying to get some rest. I'll move on in the morning." Her voice trembled slightly, and Ethan noticed the faint shiver in her frame. He hesitated, torn between walking away and acting on the unexpected wave of compassion that stirred within him. "You're pregnant," he said, the obvious observation carrying an unspoken question. She nodded, her expression guarded. "Yes. And no, there's no one waiting for me. It's just me and this little one." Her words hit Ethan like a jolt. The image of his own barren future flashed in his mind. Without thinking, he extended a hand. "Come with me. I can't leave you out here like this." The woman hesitated, her suspicion evident. "Why would you care?" Ethan straightened, suddenly aware of how strange his offer must have seemed. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because I can help, and I don't see any reason not to." She studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes scanning his tailored suit and polished demeanor. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and placed her hand in his. Ethan helped her to her feet, steadying her as she wobbled slightly. "What's your name?" he asked as they walked toward his car. Emily, she said, her voice barely audible. I'm Ethan, he replied, opening the car door for her. Let's get you somewhere safe, Emily. As the car sped through the quiet streets, Ethan's mind raced. He didn't fully understand why he had stopped or what he planned to do next. All he knew was that this unexpected encounter had awakened a glimmer of hope, or desperation, that he hadn't felt in years. Emily sat silently beside him, her hand resting on her belly. She didn't know where this sudden twist in her night would lead, but something about Ethan's quiet intensity made her believe, for the first time in a long time, that she might be safe. The following morning, Emily awoke in a guest room that felt like a dream. The bed was soft, the sheets smelled fresh, and sunlight streamed through large windows overlooking a manicured garden. For a moment, she forgot where she was. But the soft knock on the door reminded her. Ethan entered, dressed casually but still exuding the confidence of a man who was used to control. In his hands was a tray with breakfast, toast, fruit, and a cup of tea. Good morning, he said, his voice calm but slightly awkward. I thought you might be hungry. Emily sat up slowly, still wary of her new surroundings. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. Ethan set the tray on the table near her. Because you needed help, he said simply. And because I have a proposition for you. Emily's brow furrowed as she studied him. A proposition? Ethan took a deep breath and sat in the chair across from her. Yes. I'll be honest. My life isn't as perfect as it looks. I need a solution to a problem, and I think you might be able to help me. Emily crossed her arms, her skepticism clear. What kind of problem? Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. My father expects me to have a child to secure my position in the family business. I can't do that, biologically. But you're about to have a baby. What if we agree to say it's mine? Emily's jaw dropped slightly. You want me to lie about my baby's father? Why would I do that? I would make it worth your while, Ethan said quickly. You wouldn't have to worry about money, shelter, or your future. You and your baby would be safe, cared for. And I would handle all the complications. Emily stared at him, her mind racing. She had no idea what kind of man Ethan really was. But the promise of stability and safety for her child was hard to ignore. And what happens when your father finds out the truth? She asked. He won't, Ethan said firmly. This isn't just about me. It's about giving us both a second chance, me to protect my legacy and you to give your child a better start in life. Think about it, Emily. We could help each other. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint rustling of leaves outside the window. Finally, Emily sighed, a mix of desperation and cautious hope in her voice. I'll think about it, she said. Ethan nodded. That's all I ask. Over the next few days, Emily began to see a side of Ethan that surprised her. He arranged for a doctor's visit, ensuring her pregnancy was on track. He bought her clothes, took her to a salon, and even set up a space in his home for her to feel comfortable. At first, Emily felt like an outsider in Ethan's polished world. But as time went on, she found herself relaxing, even laughing at his dry humor and awkward attempts to make her feel at home. Ethan, too, seemed to soften, his usual reserved demeanor giving way to moments of genuine warmth. By the end of the week, Emily sat across from Ethan at the dining table, her decision made. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady. But I have one condition. Ethan leaned forward, his interest piqued. Name it. Whatever happens, I won't be just a pawn in your plan, Emily said firmly. If I'm going to do this, I need to be treated with respect, as an equal. Ethan's expression softened. Agreed, he said. In that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Neither knew how their arrangement would unfold, but for the first time, both felt like they weren't facing their challenges alone. The transformation of Emily into Ethan's supposed partner was swift and precise, like a jewel being polished to perfection. His staff, accustomed to discreetly managing his personal affairs, ensured she had everything she needed. Emily was fitted with an elegant wardrobe, trained in social etiquette, and introduced to the nuances of the high society world she was about to enter. At first, Emily found the process overwhelming. She stumbled over the right fork during dinners, struggled to match names to faces at charity galas, and felt like an imposter in designer gowns. But her resilience shone through. By the end of the first month, Emily could navigate a room of influential figures with poise and grace, though privately, she often laughed at the absurdity of it all. Ethan, for his part, was attentive, ensuring Emily was never left to fend for herself in unfamiliar situations. Their partnership grew, not just in execution but in mutual understanding. There were moments of genuine connection, a shared laugh over a clumsy dance lesson, quiet conversations about their pasts, and even debates about the future. But not everyone was convinced by their sudden bond. Matthew, Ethan's younger brother, had always lived in the shadow of his older sibling. While Ethan had been groomed to inherit the family empire, Matthew was left to carve out his identity in smaller, less celebrated roles within the company. The arrival of Emily, and her mysterious background, fueled Matthew's long-held suspicions about Ethan's perfect facade. One evening, during a family dinner hosted by Robert Walker, the tension came to a head. Emily, glowing in a modest yet elegant dress, sat beside Ethan, her presence carefully curated to exude confidence and warmth. Matthew leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass lazily. "So, Emily," he said, his tone casual but laced with malice, "it's fascinating how little we know about you. Tell us, where exactly did you and Ethan meet?" Emily stiffened slightly but kept her composure. "We met by chance," she replied smoothly. "It was an unexpected but fortunate encounter." Matthew smirked. "Fortunate indeed. It's remarkable how quickly you've adapted to our world. Almost too remarkable." Ethan's jaw tightened, and he set his glass down with deliberate precision. "Matthew, if you have something to say, say it," he said coldly. Robert, who had been observing silently, raised a hand to interrupt. "Enough, both of you," he said in a firm tone. "This isn't the time for petty arguments." But Matthew wasn't ready to let it go. That night, he began digging deeper into Emily's past, determined to uncover the truth. His suspicions only grew when he found no trace of Emily in the social circles she now frequented. The following week, Matthew confronted Ethan in his office. He stormed in, waving a file in his hand. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Matthew spat. "But you've slipped up. Emily's story doesn't add up, and I'm going to find out why." Ethan stood, his expression icy. "Leave her out of this, Matthew." "Oh, I will, once you admit what you're hiding," Matthew challenged. "You're not just risking your reputation, Ethan. You're jeopardizing the family name." Ethan's fists clenched, but his voice remained steady. "I won't let you drag Emily into your vendetta. Stay out of it." Matthew smirked, leaning in closer. "You'd better hope she's worth it. Because when this blows up, it'll be on you." As Matthew stormed out, Ethan sank back into his chair, his mind racing. He knew it was only a matter of time before the fragile balance they had built would be tested. And with Matthew digging deeper, the truth about their arrangement might come to light sooner than either of them expected. Weeks passed, and the tension within the Walker family simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. Matthew's suspicions grew louder in his accusations, while Ethan and Emily struggled to maintain their fragile facade. Yet, amidst the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. Robert Walker, the patriarch, started to soften toward Emily. At first, it was small gestures, a rare compliment on her poise at a charity dinner or a quiet nod of approval during a family meeting. But over time, Robert began to engage Emily in conversations, curious about her thoughts on matters beyond the superficial. Emily's honesty and grounded perspective, qualities so often absent in their world, intrigued him. One evening, as the family gathered in the grand sitting room, Emily felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. Her breath caught, and she instinctively clutched her belly. Ethan was at her side in an instant. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. Emily nodded, trying to steady herself. "I think it's time." The realization hit like a bolt of lightning. Ethan called for the car while Robert barked orders to the staff, surprising everyone with his sudden urgency. Even Matthew, usually the first to sneer at any sign of sentiment, looked unsettled as Emily was carefully helped into the waiting vehicle. The ride to the hospital was a blur. Emily's contractions came faster, and her usually calm demeanor cracked under the intensity of the pain. Ethan held her hand, his own fear barely contained as he whispered reassurances. Hours later, the cries of a newborn filled the delivery room. Emily, exhausted but radiant, cradled a tiny baby girl in her arms. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes as he looked at the child, a life so small yet so profoundly significant. In the waiting room, Robert paced restlessly. When Ethan emerged, holding the baby, the old man's stern expression melted into something softer. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the child. "What's her name?" Robert asked quietly. Emily, now sitting up in bed, smiled from across the room. "We haven't decided yet. But we wanted you to be part of that decision." Robert was visibly moved, though he masked it with a gruff nod. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time in years, the Walkers seemed united. Even Matthew, standing awkwardly at the back of the room, couldn't entirely hide the awe on his face as he watched the baby yawn and stretch in Ethan's arms. But as the family shared this moment of joy, Matthew's suspicions lingered. He watched Emily closely, still unwilling to let go of the doubts that had consumed him. Later that night, Robert pulled Ethan aside. "You've done something remarkable," he said. "This family hasn't felt like a family in a long time. Whatever brought you and Emily together?" "I'm grateful." Ethan's throat tightened. The weight of the lie he and Emily shared loomed large, but for now, he chose to hold on to the fragile peace they had achieved. In the days that followed, the family rallied around the newborn, showering her with love and attention. Yet, beneath the surface, questions remained unanswered. The birth had brought them closer, but it had also set the stage for revelations that could either solidify their bond or shatter it entirely. The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustment for the Walkers. The baby, now named Clara, a choice made by Ethan, Emily, and Robert together, became the center of everyone's attention. Emily, though initially hesitant, found herself embraced by the household staff and even by Robert, who often visited to check on his granddaughter. But beneath the surface, tension remained. Matthew's determination to expose the truth had not waned, and his resentment festered. The cracks in the family's newfound harmony widened when Matthew made his move. One afternoon, during a family gathering in Robert's sprawling estate, Matthew stood abruptly as they shared coffee in the parlor. "It's time we stopped pretending," he announced, his voice sharp. Everyone froze. Ethan stiffened, his grip tightening on his coffee cup, while Emily's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" Robert asked, his tone carrying both authority and a hint of irritation. Matthew pulled a folder from his briefcase and dropped it onto the table. "This," he said, his voice dripping with smugness. "Everything about Emily's past. She wasn't some serendipitous find. She was homeless. Desperate. Ethan didn't fall in love with her, he made a deal with her to pass this baby off as his own." The room fell silent, the weight of Matthew's words sinking in. Robert's expression darkened as he turned to Ethan. "Is this true?" Ethan's heart pounded, but he stood tall, his voice steady. "It's true that I made a deal with Emily. But it's also true that she's become more than I ever expected. She's part of this family now, and Clara is my daughter in every way that matters." Matthew scoffed. "You're justifying a lie. How can you expect us to believe anything you say anymore?" Emily, her hands trembling, stood as well. "I didn't come here to deceive anyone," she said, her voice breaking but determined. "I was desperate. I accepted Ethan's offer because it was a way to survive, for me and for Clara. But everything I've done since has been out of love for this family, for Ethan, and for our daughter. Believe what you want, but that's the truth." Robert, his face unreadable, stood and walked to the window. The silence stretched unbearably until he finally spoke. "You're right, Matthew. There was deception. But what you fail to see is the transformation that came from it." He turned to face his family, his gaze firm. "Ethan, you proved to me that this family means more to you than appearances. Emily, you showed strength and courage that most people in this world lack. And Clara, she's brought us together in ways I never thought possible." Matthew's face twisted in disbelief. "So, what? You're just going to forgive them? Pretend none of this happened?" Robert's expression softened as he looked at his youngest son. "Forgiveness doesn't mean ignoring the truth. It means recognizing what truly matters. Ethan and Emily built something real out of a flawed beginning. That's more valuable than any contract or rule I could impose." The room remained still, the weight of Robert's words settling over everyone. For the first time, Ethan felt the burden of his father's expectations lift. Matthew stormed out, unwilling to accept the resolution. But for Ethan and Emily, it was a moment of catharsis. Robert embraced them both, holding Clara gently in his arms. Later, as the evening settled into calm, Robert revealed something unexpected. "That clause in my will," he said to Ethan, his voice low but clear. "It was never about a biological heir. It was about ensuring that you understood what it means to truly value others. You've passed the real test, Ethan." Ethan, moved beyond words, simply nodded. For the first time in years, he felt at peace, not just with his father, but with himself. As the family began to heal, Ethan and Emily looked forward to a future built on truth, love, and the strength they had discovered in one another. Clara, their little miracle, symbolized not only a new beginning for them but also for the entire Walker family. The days following Matthew's dramatic exit were quiet but heavy with unspoken tension. Though the immediate storm had passed, the family still bore the marks of the confrontation. Ethan and Emily focused on caring for Clara, finding solace in her tiny smiles and bright eyes, but they couldn't ignore the lingering unease in the air. Robert, however, seemed reinvigorated. The truth had clarified his perspective, and he became a frequent presence in Ethan and Emily's home. He often spent hours with Clara, his stern demeanor softening in her presence. But beneath his calm exterior, Robert remained concerned about Matthew. One evening, as Ethan put Clara to sleep, Robert approached him in the study. Ethan, seated near the fireplace with a glass of whiskey in hand, looked up at his father with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. "Matthew isn't handling this well," Robert began, his tone deliberate. "I've seen him harbor grudges before, but this feels different." Ethan sighed, setting his glass down. "He's always resented me, Dad. But this time, I think he feels like I've taken something from him, something he can't get back." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "I may have contributed to that resentment," he admitted. "I spent years pitting the two of you against each other, thinking competition would make you stronger. I was wrong." Ethan looked at his father, surprised by the rare display of vulnerability. "What do we do now?" Robert's eyes hardened with resolve. "We bring him back. This family isn't whole without him, no matter how angry he is." The opportunity came unexpectedly. A few days later, Matthew's assistant reached out to Ethan, informing him that Matthew had been staying at a remote cabin owned by the family. His work within the company had been sporadic, his usual drive replaced by erratic behavior. Without hesitation, Ethan and Robert drove to the cabin, leaving Emily with Clara. The journey was long and quiet, punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of the car's engine. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities, what he would say, how Matthew might react. When they arrived, the cabin was dark, save for the faint glow of a single lamp inside. Ethan knocked on the door, the sound echoing through the still night. After a long pause, Matthew opened the door. His face was haggard, his usual polished appearance replaced by stubble and dark circles under his eyes. He looked at them with a mixture of surprise and irritation. "What are you doing here?" Matthew asked, his voice rough. "We're here because we care," Robert said firmly, stepping forward. "No matter how angry you are, Matthew, you're still my son. And I won't stand by while you isolate yourself like this." Matthew scoffed, leaning against the doorframe. "Care? You only care about Ethan. You always have. I'm just the afterthought, the spare." Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "That's not true, Matthew. I know I've been blind to how you felt, but this isn't about competition anymore. This is about us, about fixing what's broken." Matthew hesitated, his defenses wavering. "You don't get it, Ethan. You've always had everything, Dad's approval, the company, the legacy. And now, you have a family too. What do I have?" Robert stepped closer, his voice softer now. "You have us, Matthew. If I made you feel like you were less important, then I failed as a father. But I'm here now, and I want to make it right." The silence that followed was heavy, but for the first time, it wasn't hostile. Matthew's gaze dropped, his shoulders sagging. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to figure it out alone," Ethan said. "We'll do it together." That night, the three of them sat in the cabin, talking for hours. It wasn't easy, decades of resentment couldn't be undone in one conversation, but it was a start. For the first time, Matthew felt truly heard, and Ethan began to understand the depth of his brother's pain. When they returned home the next day, Emily greeted them with relief and hope in her eyes. Clara, nestled in her arms, cooed softly, her innocent presence a reminder of what they were all fighting to protect. The Walkers weren't perfect, but they were learning that family wasn't about never making mistakes, it was about choosing to heal, no matter how difficult the process. For Matthew, Ethan, Emily, and Robert, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by reconciliation and the unshakable bond of family. The Walker estate seemed to breathe easier in the weeks following the night at the cabin. For the first time in years, there was an air of tentative peace. Matthew had returned, quieter but present, and the family began to move forward cautiously, each member treading the delicate ground of their renewed connection. Emily, ever observant, noticed how Matthew lingered in the background during family gatherings, his attempts to rejoin the fold weighed down by his lingering doubts and regrets. She decided to take the first step, catching him alone in the library one afternoon. Matthew was leafing through an old book, though his eyes didn't seem to focus on the text. When Emily entered, he looked up, his expression guarded. "Do you mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice gentle. He shrugged, motioning toward the opposite chair. "It's a free house," he muttered. Emily sat, the weight of her words carefully measured. "Matthew, I wanted to thank you," she began. He frowned. "Thank me? For what?" "For holding Ethan accountable," she said, surprising him. "You forced us to confront things we might have avoided otherwise. And in a way, you helped us grow stronger." Matthew's brow furrowed, skepticism evident. "You don't have to sugarcoat things, Emily. I made things harder for you. For everyone." She shook her head. "Maybe, but I've learned that the hardest truths often lead to the most meaningful change. And I've seen the good in you, Matthew. You care, even if you don't always know how to show it." For a moment, Matthew was silent, his defenses softening just slightly. "I didn't want to hurt you," he admitted. I felt like I was losing everything." Emily reached across the table, placing a hand on his. You haven't lost anything, Matthew. You've gained a family that wants you here. And that includes me and Clara. Matthew's eyes flickered with emotion, but he masked it quickly, pulling his hand away and standing abruptly. Thanks, Emily, he said gruffly, his voice betraying the gratitude he couldn't yet express fully. Later that evening, Ethan found Emily in the nursery, rocking Clara to sleep. He leaned against the doorway, watching the gentle way she cradled their daughter. You talked to Matthew, he said, his tone more statement than question. Emily glanced up, her smile soft. He's trying, Ethan. And I think he just needs someone to remind him that he's not alone. Ethan stepped closer, his hand brushing her shoulder. You have a way of bringing out the best in people, he said, his voice filled with admiration. Even in my stubborn brother. Emily laughed quietly, careful not to wake Clara. He's not so different from you, you know. You both want to be seen, to matter. And you both love this family more than you realize. Ethan's expression grew serious as he gazed at her. You're the reason we're finding our way back to each other. You and Clara. The following weekend, Robert called for a family meeting in the grand dining hall. The Walkers gathered, each curious but slightly wary of what their patriarch had planned. When everyone was seated, Robert stood at the head of the table, a rare warmth in his eyes. I've been thinking a lot about this family, he began. About our mistakes, our triumphs, and what binds us together. And I've realized that legacy isn't about wealth or power. It's about the connections we build and the love we leave behind. His gaze swept across the table, lingering on each of them. From this day forward, we start anew. No more ultimatums, no more competition. We are a family first. The business, the name, the expectations, they come second. Ethan and Matthew exchanged a glance, both moved by their father's words. Emily felt a swell of emotion as Robert's gaze landed on her. You've shown us what it means to fight for what matters, Emily, he said. You've given this family a second chance, and for that, I'm eternally grateful. The meeting ended with a toast to Clara, the little girl who had brought them all back together. As the Walkers sat around the table, laughing and sharing stories, it felt for the first time as if the fractures that had once divided them were beginning to heal. That night, as Ethan and Emily stood on the balcony overlooking the estate, Ethan pulled her close. We've come a long way, he said, his voice filled with wonder. Emily smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. And there's still so much more to come. Together, they looked out at the sprawling landscape, a future full of possibilities stretching before them. The peaceful atmosphere at the Walker estate was short-lived. Just as the family began to find stability, a shadow from Emily's past re-emerged, threatening to unravel everything. It started with a phone call. Emily was in the kitchen with Clara, humming softly as she fed her daughter. The cheerful moment was interrupted by the sharp ring of her phone. She picked it up, expecting Ethan or one of the household staff, but the voice on the other end made her freeze. Emily. It's Daniel. Her grip on the phone tightened. Daniel, the man she had once trusted before her life spiraled out of control. He was the reason she had ended up homeless, abandoned and betrayed when she needed support the most. Hearing his voice now sent a chill through her. What do you want? Emily asked, her voice cold but trembling. I heard you've moved up in the world, Daniel said, his tone slick and insincere. You've got a rich man taking care of you now, huh? Maybe it's time you gave back to someone who helped you once. Emily's heart pounded. She knew exactly where this was going. You didn't help me, Daniel. You left me with nothing. And yet, here you are, living the high life, he sneered. I'm not asking for much, Emily. Just a little help for an old friend. Let's call it repayment. Emily's hands shook as she ended the call, her mind racing. She couldn't let this man disrupt the fragile life she had built, but the threat hung over her like a storm cloud. Ethan noticed her unease that evening. They were sitting in the study after dinner, Clara sleeping peacefully in her crib. "You've been quiet today," he said, his brow furrowed. "Is something wrong?" Emily hesitated, torn between protecting Ethan and confiding in him. Finally, she took a deep breath. "Someone from my past reached out," she admitted. "Someone who doesn't have good intentions." Ethan's eyes darkened. "Who is it? What do they want?" "His name is Daniel," she said. "He's an old mistake. He's trying to blackmail me, Ethan. He knows about my past and wants money to stay quiet." Ethan's jaw tightened, his protective instincts flaring. "He's not going to lay a finger on you or Clara. I'll make sure of it." Emily placed a hand on his arm. "I don't want this to spiral out of control. I've dealt with people like Daniel before. He feeds on fear, and I won't give him the satisfaction." Ethan nodded, though the tension in his body remained. "You're not alone in this, Emily. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The next day, Daniel made his move. He showed up uninvited at one of Ethan's flagship stores, waiting until Emily arrived for a meeting with the marketing team. As she stepped out of the car, Daniel approached, his smirk infuriatingly confident. "You're looking well, Emily," he said, his tone mocking. Emily's stomach churned, but she stood tall. "Leave, Daniel. You don't belong here." "Not until we have a little chat," he said, his voice lowering. "Unless you want me to start talking to the press about where you really came from." Before Emily could respond, Ethan appeared, his presence commanding and unrelenting. "I suggest you leave before I call security," he said, his voice like steel. Daniel's confidence wavered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Ah, the knight in shining armor," he drawled. "You have no idea who she really is, do you?" "I know everything I need to," Ethan said firmly. "And I also know how to deal with people like you. Leave, Daniel. You've already lost." Daniel's smirk faltered as Ethan stepped closer, his expression unyielding. Sensing he was outmatched, Daniel raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fine. I'll go, for now. But don't think this is over." As Daniel walked away, Emily let out a shaky breath, her resolve crumbling as Ethan pulled her into a comforting embrace. "I won't let him hurt you," he murmured. "Or Clara. We'll handle this." In the days that followed, Ethan worked with his legal team to ensure Daniel couldn't threaten Emily or their family again. Though the process was draining, it brought Emily and Ethan even closer, their bond strengthened by their shared determination to protect what they had built. But the encounter had left its mark. Emily realized she couldn't keep running from her past. It was time to confront it head-on, not just for herself but for the family she had come to love so deeply. And this time, she wouldn't face it alone. The encounter with Daniel lingered in Emily's mind, casting a shadow over her days. She knew she couldn't let his threat fester. After much thought, she decided to face him on her terms, not his. With Ethan's unwavering support, she began taking steps to regain control over the narrative of her life. Emily met with Ethan in the study one evening, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Clara was asleep, and the house was quiet, offering a rare moment of solitude. "I need to deal with Daniel," Emily said, her tone resolute. Ethan frowned, his protective instincts kicking in. "I've already put measures in place. My legal team is watching him closely. He won't get near you again." "I appreciate that," Emily replied, her eyes softening. "But this isn't just about him. It's about me. I've been running from my past for too long. If I keep hiding, people like Daniel will always have power over me." Ethan studied her for a moment before nodding. "What do you want to do?" "I want to tell my story, on my own terms," Emily said firmly. "I want to be honest about where I came from and how I got here. No secrets, no fear. Just the truth." Ethan reached for her hand, his expression proud. If that's what you want, I'll support you. Whatever it takes. Over the next few days, Emily began crafting her story with the help of a trusted journalist Ethan connected her with. She recounted her journey, from her struggles on the streets to the moment she met Ethan and the life they had built together. It was raw and emotional, but it was hers, and she refused to let anyone else control it. When the story was published, it sent ripples through the media. The headline read, "From the Streets to the Walker Estate, a story of redemption, love, and strength." Public reaction was mixed at first. Some praised Emily's courage and resilience, while others questioned her motives and the authenticity of her relationship with Ethan. But as more people read the article, the narrative shifted. Emily's honesty and vulnerability resonated with many, turning her into a symbol of hope and determination. Even Robert, a man who had built his life on maintaining appearances, found himself moved. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, he raised his glass in a rare moment of emotional openness. "To Emily," he said, his voice steady but filled with pride. "For her courage, her strength, and for reminding us all that it's not where you start, but how you choose to move forward." The toast was met with smiles and clinking glasses, but the most meaningful reaction came from Matthew. He approached Emily after dinner, his usual guarded expression replaced by something softer. "I read the article," he said quietly. "It was brave. And I think you were right. Facing your past, it's the only way to move on." Emily smiled, touched by his words. "Thank you, Matthew. That means a lot coming from you." But as the Walkers began to settle into this new chapter, Daniel's shadow remained. Though Emily had taken control of her story, she knew Daniel wouldn't let go so easily. And when an envelope arrived at the estate bearing his name, her resolve was tested once again. Inside was a single photo, a younger Emily, smiling beside Daniel, holding hands. On the back, a note read, "There's more to your story, Emily. Let's see if the world is ready for it." Emily stared at the photo, her heart pounding. She knew Daniel's game wasn't over, but this time, she wasn't the same vulnerable woman he once manipulated. With Ethan by her side and the Walkers standing united, she was ready for whatever came next. The past had lost its power to break her. Now, it was her weapon to fight back and protect the life she had built. The photograph and Daniel's ominous note weighed heavily on Emily's mind. She knew it was a calculated move, a provocation meant to rattle her. Instead of fear, however, it ignited a fierce determination within her. She wouldn't let Daniel control her life any longer. Emily brought the photo to Ethan that evening, finding him in the study reviewing plans for an upcoming expansion of Walker Jewels. When he saw the image and read the note, his expression darkened. "He's playing games," Ethan said, his voice low and controlled. "But we can outmaneuver him. Whatever he thinks he has, we'll neutralize it." Emily nodded, her resolve firm. "I'm tired of reacting to him. I want to take the offensive." Ethan reached for her hand. "Then we will. But we'll do it carefully. He won't see it coming." The next day, Ethan brought in a private investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Ava with a reputation for being relentless. Ava began digging into Daniel's life, searching for leverage or evidence that could expose his schemes. Meanwhile, Emily worked with Ethan's legal team to draft a cease and desist order, making it clear that any further attempts at harassment would have severe consequences. As days turned into weeks, Ava's investigation bore fruit. She uncovered a string of financial misdeeds in Daniel's past, fraudulent deals, unpaid debts, and connections to shady business practices. Armed with this information, Ethan and Emily devised a plan to confront Daniel on their terms. They arranged a meeting in a neutral location, a private room at an upscale restaurant in the city. Daniel arrived, his smirk intact as he strode into the room. But when he saw Ethan and Emily seated confidently across the table, his expression flickered with unease. "Nice to see you again, Emily," Daniel said, sliding into the seat opposite her. "And Ethan. Always a pleasure." Ethan leaned forward, his gaze unyielding. Let's skip the pleasantries, Daniel. You think you have leverage, but you don't. We know about your past, and we're prepared to make it public if you don't back off. Daniel's smirk returned, though it lacked its usual confidence. My past? That's rich coming from someone who's built his life on keeping secrets. He turned to Emily, his tone taunting. And you, how do you think people will react when they see more of these little mementos from our time together? Emily didn't flinch. Let them, she said firmly. I've already told my story. Nothing you reveal can hurt me now. But your skeletons. They might bury you. Daniel's face tightened as Ethan slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents detailing Daniel's financial crimes, complete with Ava's thorough notes. You're at a crossroads, Daniel, Ethan said, his voice calm but deadly serious. You can walk away now and leave Emily and our family alone, or we can let the world see who you really are. Your choice. Daniel stared at the folder, his confidence visibly cracking. He knew he was outmaneuvered, but his pride wouldn't let him admit defeat so easily. Fine, he said finally, his voice sharp with resentment. You've made your point. I'll leave you alone, for now. Ethan didn't budge. Not for now. Forever. If you try anything again, there won't be a next time. Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Enjoy your victory while it lasts, he said, before storming out of the room. As the door closed behind him, Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Ethan reached for her hand, his grip reassuring. It's over, he said softly. For now, Emily replied, her voice steady but cautious. People like Daniel don't give up easily. But this time, I'm ready for him. That night, as they returned to the estate, Emily felt a sense of closure. Daniel's shadow no longer loomed as large, and she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. In the nursery, Clara gurgled happily as Emily held her close. Ethan stood nearby, watching them with a look of quiet pride. We're building something real, Emily said, her voice filled with emotion. And no one can take that away from us. Ethan leaned down, kissing her forehead. Not as long as we stand together. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt truly free. The past no longer defined her, it had become a stepping stone toward the future she was determined to create. In the days after their confrontation with Daniel, Emily and Ethan began to settle into a routine that felt like progress. The constant anxiety that had hung over their heads began to dissipate. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to imagine a future where her past no longer had the power to haunt her. But the confrontation had left ripples in its wake. Word of the meeting began to circulate, thanks to Daniel's bitterness. He hadn't revealed details, but whispers of Emily's past resurfaced in certain social circles, leaving Ethan and Emily to navigate a subtle but palpable tension. One such moment came during a gala hosted by one of Ethan's longtime business partners, a grand affair attended by the city's elite. Emily accompanied Ethan, stepping into the glittering ballroom with Clara's recent laughter still echoing in her mind. She held her head high, her gown an elegant emerald green that complemented her strength and grace. The murmurs began almost immediately. A cluster of women near the champagne table exchanged pointed glances, their voices hushed but intentionally loud enough to be heard. Isn't that her? One whispered. The one with that past? Emily caught the words but chose not to react. She had prepared herself for moments like these. But as the evening wore on, the subtle barbs became harder to ignore. At one point, an older woman approached, her expression a mixture of curiosity and condescension. Emily, isn't it? I've heard so much about you, she said, her smile sharp. Emily matched her gaze, her voice calm. I hope it's all good. The woman tilted her head, feigning sweetness. Well, they say every jewel has a history, don't they? Some more colorful than others. Before Emily could respond, Ethan appeared at her side, his hand resting protectively on her back. His expression was warm, but his words carried a clear edge. "And it's the imperfections that make a jewel truly unique, isn't it?" he said smoothly. "Emily's story is what gives her strength. I'd say she shines brighter because of it." The woman's smile faltered, and she quickly excused herself. Ethan turned to Emily, his eyes filled with reassurance. "You don't have to face this alone," he said quietly. Emily smiled, grateful for his unwavering support. "I know. But I can handle it. We can handle it." As the evening progressed, something remarkable happened. A few guests approached Emily, not with judgment but with genuine admiration. A young woman, shy but determined, introduced herself as a fan of Emily's story, having read about her journey in the article. "You've inspired me," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've struggled with my own past, but seeing how you've risen above it gives me hope." Emily's heart swelled with emotion. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "Remember, your past doesn't define you. It's what you choose to do with it that matters." By the end of the night, Emily realized something important. While there would always be those who sought to diminish her, there were far more who saw her strength and courage. Back at the estate, as Emily and Ethan stood on the balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens, she leaned into him, her hand resting on his chest. "Tonight was a reminder," she said softly. "A reminder that not everyone will understand or accept me. But I don't need everyone's approval. I just need to stay true to myself." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "And you'll always have me, Emily. You and Clara are my world. Let them say what they want. We know the truth." Emily smiled, a sense of peace settling over her. For every shadow of the past that tried to creep in, she had found a light stronger than any darkness. That light was her family, her resilience, and the love that bound them together. As they stood there, united against whatever challenges might come, Emily knew they were ready to face the future, together. In the weeks following the gala, the Walkers experienced a rare sense of calm. The public attention surrounding Emily's story began to wane, replaced by admiration for her poise and the family's unity. Even the whispers in elite circles softened, as many came to view Emily not as a scandal but as a testament to resilience. However, one person remained distant, Matthew. Though he had returned to the family fold, his interactions with Emily and Ethan were cautious, as though he was still processing the events that had shaken their lives. Emily decided it was time to address the lingering distance. She found Matthew in the estate's greenhouse one afternoon, tending to the exotic plants he had taken up as a hobby. "I didn't know you were into gardening," Emily said, stepping inside. Matthew glanced at her but didn't stop his work. "It's something to focus on," he said curtly. Emily took a few steps closer, her voice gentle. "Matthew, I know things haven't been easy between us. But I want to change that." He set down his tools and turned to her, his expression conflicted. "It's not that simple, Emily. You've proven yourself to the family, to Ethan. But I've spent so long feeling like I'm on the outside looking in." Emily nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "I know what it feels like to be on the outside," she said. "But you're not alone anymore, Matthew. This family isn't complete without you." Matthew hesitated, his defenses wavering. "It's hard to let go of the past. Of the resentment. And it's hard to forgive," Emily admitted. "But if we keep holding on to what divides us, we'll never move forward. I want to move forward, with you, with Ethan, with all of us." For a long moment, Matthew was silent, his gaze fixed on the vibrant orchids blooming nearby. Then he sighed, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Maybe it's time I gave this family a real chance." Emily smiled, relief washing over her. "That's all I've ever wanted." The next day, Matthew joined the family for breakfast, his demeanor noticeably lighter. He even joked with Ethan about Clara's newest habit of grabbing anything within reach, earning a laugh from the entire table. It was a turning point, not just for Matthew but for the entire family. The barriers that had once divided them began to crumble, replaced by a shared commitment to healing and growth. Robert, who had observed these changes quietly, decided it was time for a gesture of his own. He called a family meeting in the estate's grand hall, a place reserved for significant announcements. As they gathered, Robert stood at the head of the room, his posture commanding but his expression warm. "I've watched this family go through its share of trials," he began. "But what I've seen in recent weeks has given me hope. Hope that we're becoming something stronger than we ever were." He gestured to a framed document resting on a nearby table. "This is a revised version of my will," he said. "I've removed the clause about an heir. From now on, the Walker legacy will be built on unity, trust, and the strength we share as a family, not on arbitrary rules or expectations." Ethan, Emily, and Matthew exchanged surprised but grateful glances. Robert continued, his voice steady. "Ethan, you've proven yourself as a leader. Emily, you've shown this family what courage truly looks like. And Matthew, you've reminded us all that no one is beyond redemption. I'm proud of each of you." The announcement marked a new chapter for the Walkers. That evening, they gathered for a celebratory dinner, the atmosphere filled with laughter and stories instead of tension. Clara, the youngest member of the family, babbled happily in her high chair, her innocent joy a symbol of the new beginnings they were embracing. As the evening drew to a close, Emily stepped out onto the terrace, the cool night air refreshing against her skin. Ethan joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Your courage brought us here," Ethan said softly. Emily shook her head, leaning into him. "It was all of us, Ethan. We each had a part to play. And now, we're stronger for it." Ethan smiled, kissing her temple. "To the future," he said, his voice filled with hope. "To the future," Emily echoed, her heart full as she gazed out at the moonlit estate. For the first time, the past felt like a distant memory, and the future, a canvas waiting to be painted. With the weight of the past lifted, the Walkers began to embrace their new chapter. The estate, once a place of tension and unspoken conflicts, buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose and unity. Even Clara seemed to sense the change, her joyful laughter filling every corner of the home. For Emily, this newfound stability brought a sense of clarity. She had spent so long reacting to life's challenges that she hadn't allowed herself to dream. But now, as she stood in the nursery one quiet afternoon, watching Clara sleep, she realized it was time to think about what came next, not just for her, but for the entire family. That evening, over dinner, Emily voiced an idea that had been forming in her mind. "What if we used our resources to help others?" she began, her voice steady but tinged with excitement. The family looked at her with curiosity. Ethan leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" Emily hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I know what it feels like to have nowhere to turn," she said. "And I've been thinking, we could create a foundation to support people who are struggling. Homeless individuals, single parents, anyone who needs a second chance." Matthew, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. "That's actually a great idea," he said, surprising everyone. "We have the resources, and it could be a way to give back." Robert nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "It's a noble cause. And it aligns with the new direction this family is taking. If you're serious about this, Emily, you'll have my full support." Ethan smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "You've already inspired this family, Emily. Now you're ready to inspire others." Within weeks, the Walker Foundation was born. Emily threw herself into the project, working alongside Ethan and Matthew to establish programs, secure partnerships, and set up shelters. Her passion was contagious, and soon the foundation became a source of pride for the entire family. The first major event was a gala to launch the foundation officially. The estate's grand ballroom was transformed into a breathtaking venue, with sparkling chandeliers, elegant floral arrangements, and banners showcasing the foundation's mission: building futures, restoring hope. Emily stood at the entrance, greeting guests with Ethan by her side. Dressed in a flowing ivory gown, she exuded confidence and warmth, a far cry from the woman who had once felt invisible. As the evening unfolded, Emily took the stage to deliver a speech. The room fell silent as she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Many of you know my story," she said. "But what you may not know is how much it means to me to stand here tonight, surrounded by people who believe in the power of second chances. This foundation is more than a project, it's a promise. A promise that no one should have to face life's challenges alone." The audience erupted in applause, and as Emily stepped down from the stage, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Later that night, as the last guests departed, Emily and Ethan stood on the terrace, overlooking the glowing lights of the estate. "You were incredible tonight," Ethan said, his voice filled with admiration. Emily smiled, her eyes shining. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without all of us." Ethan pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. "This is just the beginning, Emily. The foundation, the family, everything we've built. It's only going to grow stronger." As they stood there, the night sky stretching endlessly above them, Emily felt a profound sense of peace. Her journey had been filled with challenges, but it had led her to this moment, a life filled with love, purpose, and the promise of a brighter future. The success of the Walker Foundation's gala ignited a wave of momentum that carried the family and their cause to new heights. Donations poured in, volunteers signed up in droves, and stories of lives transformed began to emerge. The Walkers became synonymous with hope and second chances, a reputation that extended far beyond their jewelry empire. For Emily, the foundation became a deeply personal mission. She spent her days visiting shelters, meeting with community leaders, and sitting with individuals whose stories mirrored her own struggles. These encounters fueled her passion and reminded her why she had fought so hard to build a new life. One afternoon, during a visit to a transitional housing facility the foundation had helped establish, Emily sat with a young woman named Maria. Maria cradled her newborn son, her eyes filled with both love and exhaustion. "You remind me of myself," Emily said gently. Maria looked at her, surprised. You have everything, how could you ever have been like me?" Emily smiled softly. "I didn't always have everything. I know what it's like to feel lost, to wonder if things will ever get better. But I also know how much strength it takes to keep going. You've already proven you have that strength." Tears welled in Maria's eyes. "It feels impossible some days." "Impossible doesn't mean you can't do it," Emily said, reaching for Maria's hand. "And you're not alone anymore. That's what the foundation is here for, to help you find your way." As Maria smiled through her tears, Emily felt a familiar pang of emotion. Every life the foundation touched reaffirmed her purpose, reminding her that the pain of her past had not been in vain. Back at the estate, the family gathered for dinner, a tradition they had grown to cherish. Clara, now toddling, was the center of attention, her laughter echoing through the dining hall as she proudly carried a wooden spoon she had commandeered from the kitchen. Matthew, who had become increasingly involved with the foundation, shared updates on a new initiative to provide educational programs for displaced families. His transformation was apparent to everyone. No longer the embittered outsider, he had found a sense of belonging and purpose within the family's efforts. "You've really stepped up," Robert said to Matthew, his voice filled with rare approval. Matthew shrugged, but a hint of pride shone in his eyes. "It feels good to be part of something bigger. To make a difference." Ethan raised his glass, a smile on his face. "To family," he said. "And to the future we're building together." The toast was met with clinking glasses and murmurs of agreement. For the Walkers, these moments of unity were no longer fleeting, they were the foundation of the life they were creating. Later that evening, Ethan and Emily sat in the nursery, watching Clara sleep. The soft glow of the nightlight illuminated the room, casting a serene atmosphere over the space. "She's going to grow up in a very different world than we did," Ethan said, his voice contemplative. Emily nodded, her gaze fixed on their daughter. "And we'll make sure she knows what matters most. Kindness, resilience, and the courage to make a difference." Ethan took her hand, their fingers intertwining. "We've come so far, Emily. And it's because of you. Your strength, your vision, you've changed all of our lives." Emily smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We've all changed, Ethan. Together. And that's what makes this family so special." As they sat in the quiet of the nursery, their hearts full of hope, Emily knew that the ripple effect of their actions would continue to spread. The foundation, the family, and the life they were building would leave a legacy far greater than they had ever imagined. As the foundation flourished, the Walkers' lives became a delicate balance of personal growth and public scrutiny. While the family's efforts were celebrated, their increasing visibility attracted both allies and adversaries. It wasn't long before the shadows of the past began to stir again, threatening to disrupt their newfound harmony. One evening, as Ethan and Emily returned from a foundation event, they found a letter waiting on the doorstep of the estate. The envelope was unmarked, but the message inside was chilling. "The truth always comes out. Are you ready for it?" Emily's hands trembled as she read the note aloud. Ethan's jaw tightened, his protective instincts flaring. "Whoever sent this is trying to intimidate us," he said. "We won't let them." But the letter wasn't the only sign of trouble. Over the next few days, whispers began to circulate in the media, rumors about Emily's past, suggesting there was more to her story than she had shared. While the foundation supporters rallied behind her, the murmurs grew louder, drawing unwanted attention. One afternoon, Ava, the private investigator who had helped with Daniel, called Ethan with an update. "I've been tracking the source of these rumors," she said. "It seems someone's been digging into Emily's records, someone with resources and a personal vendetta." Ethan's thoughts immediately went to Daniel, but Ava hesitated. "It's not him," she said. "It's someone closer. Someone who knows the family." The revelation left Ethan cold. Could someone within their inner circle be working against them? That evening, Ethan called a family meeting, determined to address the situation head-on. The Walkers gathered in the estate study, their faces etched with concern. "There's been a breach of trust," Ethan began, his voice steady but firm. "Someone is trying to undermine Emily and the foundation. Ava believes it's someone close to us." The room fell silent. Robert's expression darkened, while Matthew looked stunned. "You think one of us is responsible?" Matthew asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I don't want to believe it," Ethan admitted. "But we need to find out who's behind this before it does any more damage." Emily, sitting beside Ethan, glanced around the room, her heart heavy. "If anyone here knows something, anything, it's better to come forward now. We can handle the truth, but we can't fight what we don't understand." The tension was palpable, but no one spoke. As the meeting ended, the unease lingered, casting a shadow over the family. The following day, Ava called with another breakthrough. "I've traced the leaks back to a member of the Walker board," she said. "And they've been in contact with someone from Emily's past." Ethan and Emily met Ava at her office, where she revealed a series of emails linking the board member to a disgruntled former associate of Daniel. The associate had been paid handsomely to supply information about Emily, much of it exaggerated or fabricated. "This isn't just about Emily," Ava said. "It's about control. Someone wants to weaken the foundation, and you." The betrayal stung, but it also solidified Ethan and Emily's resolve. They returned to the estate, ready to confront the board and protect what they had built. At the next board meeting, Ethan presented the evidence, his tone calm but unyielding. "This family has worked too hard to let someone tear us apart," he said. If you think you can exploit our past to control our future, you're wrong. The board member in question stammered a defense, but the evidence was damning. They were removed from their position, and Ethan and Emily issued a public statement addressing the rumors directly. "We won't hide from the truth," Emily said during a press conference. "Our story isn't perfect, but it's ours. And no amount of speculation will change the work we're doing or the lives we're impacting." The honesty resonated with the public, turning the tide in their favor. The foundation supporters rallied behind them, and the attempted sabotage only strengthened their resolve. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the mood was lighter. Clara played with her favorite stuffed animal, her laughter filling the room. Robert raised his glass, a rare smile on his face. "To resilience," he said. "And to the strength that comes from standing together." As they toasted, Emily felt a deep sense of gratitude. The secrets of the past might have threatened to unravel them, but their unity had turned the challenge into yet another step forward. For the Walkers, the lesson was clear: no matter the trials they faced, they would rise above them, together. The storm of betrayal had passed, but its ripples remained. The Walkers moved forward cautiously, their unity stronger but their trust shaken. Emily, while outwardly composed, felt the lingering sting of having her past weaponized against her. The betrayal by someone so close to the family was a stark reminder of how fragile their progress could be. One evening, as Emily was reviewing proposals for a new foundation initiative, Matthew entered the room. He hesitated at the door, uncharacteristically unsure of himself. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Emily looked up, surprised by the tentative tone in his voice. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Matthew stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He paced for a moment before sitting across from her, his expression conflicted. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice low. "Something I should have said a long time ago." Emily set her papers aside, giving him her full attention. "Go on," she said gently. Matthew took a deep breath. "When all those rumors about you started, I didn't do enough to stop them. I didn't start them, but I knew people who were talking, and I didn't shut it down. Part of me thought, if you were knocked down a peg, maybe I'd finally feel like I belonged." His confession hit Emily like a wave. She stared at him, a mix of hurt and understanding in her eyes. "Matthew," she began, her voice steady but soft, "why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because I was ashamed," he admitted, his gaze dropping to the floor. "And because you and Ethan have done so much for this family. I didn't want to be the one to ruin it." Emily let the silence hang for a moment before speaking. "Thank you for telling me. It takes courage to admit when you've been wrong." Matthew looked up, surprised by her calm response. "You've changed, Matthew," she continued. "I see it in the way you've stepped up for the foundation, for the family. But trust is built through action. If you want to make things right, start by being the person I know you're capable of being." Matthew nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "I will. I promise." The next day, Matthew took a bold step to prove his commitment. He reached out to Ava, offering to assist in tracking down any remaining threats to the family and foundation. He also began working closely with Emily on a new initiative to support individuals rebuilding their lives after betrayal, a deeply personal project for both of them. As the weeks passed, Matthew's dedication became evident. He threw himself into the work, earning back the family's trust piece by piece. His efforts culminated in a powerful moment during a foundation event, where he stood on stage beside Emily and shared his own struggles with resentment and redemption. "It's easy to let the past define you," Matthew said, his voice steady. "But what matters is what you choose to do next. I've made mistakes, but I'm here to prove that change is possible, for all of us." The audience erupted in applause, and as Matthew stepped off the stage, Ethan clapped him on the back, pride evident in his eyes. "You've come a long way, little brother," Ethan said. Matthew smiled, the weight of his past finally lifting. That evening, as the family gathered around the fireplace, Clara toddled over to Matthew, her tiny hands holding one of her favorite books. "Read," she demanded, her voice full of innocent determination. Matthew chuckled, scooping her up and settling her on his lap. "All right, kiddo. Let's see what we've got here." As he began to read, the family watched in quiet contentment. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined them. Instead, they were reminders of how far they had come, and how much stronger they had become together. Emily leaned into Ethan, her heart full. "We're not just building a future," she said softly. "We're rewriting what it means to be a family." Ethan kissed her forehead. "And we're doing it the right way, together." In that moment, surrounded by love and laughter, Emily knew they were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The foundation was secure, the family united, and the future bright. The Walker estate had become a haven of warmth and resilience. What once felt like a fortress filled with unspoken tensions now thrived as a home where every member contributed to the family's newfound unity. Clara was the heart of it all, her laughter echoing through the halls, a constant reminder of how far they had come. For Emily, life felt richer than she had ever imagined. The foundation was expanding rapidly, and her partnership with Ethan had deepened into something unshakable. Yet, she remained vigilant, knowing that life's challenges rarely stayed at bay for long. One afternoon, as Emily returned from a foundation meeting, she found Ethan in the garden, seated at a wrought iron table under a canopy of blooming wisteria. He was reviewing papers, his expression focused but relaxed. She kissed him on the cheek, taking a seat beside him. "Busy?" she asked, glancing at the documents. "Just going over some proposals for a new collection," Ethan said, setting the papers aside. "But I'd rather hear about your day." Emily smiled, her eyes lighting up. "It was productive. We finalized plans for the new shelter downtown. It's going to open in a few months." Ethan reached for her hand, his pride evident. "You've created something incredible, Emily. It's more than a foundation, it's a legacy." Before Emily could respond, Matthew approached, holding a stack of envelopes. "Mail just came in," he said, handing them over. "Looks like some letters for the foundation, and a personal one for you, Emily." She frowned, taking the handwritten envelope. It was addressed simply to Emily Walker, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. She opened it carefully, her heart skipping a beat as she read the contents. Emily. "I've been watching your success from afar, and I can't stay silent any longer. I need to speak with you, about the life you left behind and the secrets that were never told. Meet me at the cafe on Pine Street tomorrow at 3 p.m. A friend. Ethan noticed the shift in her expression. "What is it?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. Emily handed him the letter. As he read, his brow furrowed. "Do you recognize the handwriting? Or have any idea who this might be?" She shook her head. "No, but whoever it is seems to know something about my past." Matthew, who had been reading over Ethan's shoulder, chimed in. "It could be another setup. We need to be careful." "I agree," Ethan said. "You shouldn't go alone." Emily hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity. "If there's even a chance this person has information that could affect our lives, I need to hear them out. But you're right, I won't go alone." The next afternoon, Emily arrived at the cafe with Ethan and Ava discreetly watching from a nearby table. She took a seat by the window, her nerves hidden behind a composed demeanor. A few minutes later, a woman in her late 30s approached. Her face was familiar, though Emily couldn't place her immediately. "Emily," the woman said, her voice tentative. "It's me, Sophie." Emily's breath caught. Sophie had been a close friend from her life before everything fell apart, before Daniel, before the streets. They had lost touch years ago, and seeing her now was like a ghost from another life. "Sophie," Emily said, her voice a mixture of surprise and emotion. "What are you doing here?" Sophie sat across from her, her eyes darting nervously. "I saw your story in the news. I didn't know how to reach you, but I had to try. There's something you need to know about Daniel." Emily's stomach tightened. "What about him?" Sophie leaned closer, her voice low. "Before he left you, he took something that belonged to you. And he's been using it to manipulate people ever since. I didn't realize what he had done until I saw your name again." Emily's heart raced. "What did he take?" Sophie hesitated before pulling a small flash drive from her bag. "It's all on here. Records, messages, everything he kept from you. I don't know the full extent, but I thought you deserved to know." Emily took the flash drive, her hand trembling. "Why are you helping me now?" Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. "Because I should have helped you then. I was scared, and I stayed silent. But seeing what you've built, I realized it's not too late to make things right." Emily reached across the table, squeezing Sophie's hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. As Emily left the cafe with Ethan and Ava, the flash drive clutched tightly in her hand, she knew this revelation could change everything. Whatever secrets Daniel had hidden, she was ready to face them, and to protect the life she had fought so hard to build. That evening, as the family gathered in the study to review the contents of the flash drive, Emily felt a familiar sense of resolve. The past had reared its head again, but she was no longer the woman who let it define her. "Whatever's on here," Ethan said, his hand resting on Emily's shoulder, "we'll deal with it together." Emily nodded, her gaze steady. Together. With her family by her side, she pressed play, ready to confront whatever truths lay ahead. The flash drive's contents illuminated the room with the cold glow of a laptop screen. Ethan, Emily, Matthew, and Robert sat in tense silence as the files loaded. Ava stood nearby, her professional calm masking her curiosity. The family was about to confront a chapter of Emily's past that could hold either answers or more trouble. The first file was a collection of emails, messages exchanged between Daniel and several business associates. Ethan's sharp eye caught the language immediately. "These aren't just casual exchanges," he said, scrolling through the correspondence. "Daniel was funneling money through dummy accounts. And he used Emily's name to legitimize some of it." Emily's stomach turned as the implication sank in. "He forged my signature," she said, her voice tight. "I never agreed to any of this." Ava leaned closer. This could explain why Daniel always seemed to resurface at the worst times. "He's been leveraging your supposed involvement to gain access to deals and influence." Robert, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. "If this gets out, it could tarnish more than just the foundation. It could impact the company's reputation. We need to act carefully." Matthew crossed his arms, his frustration evident. "No. We've spent too long hiding from the truth. If Daniel is using Emily's name to profit off this, we expose him. Let him face the consequences." Ethan nodded in agreement. "Matthew's right. We need to get ahead of this. But first, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with." The next file was a video recording. As the family watched, they saw a much younger Emily, unaware she was being filmed. Daniel's voice could be heard off camera, coaxing her into signing documents while he sweet-talked her with promises of a better future. Emily's hands clenched into fists as the memories resurfaced. "He was manipulating me even then," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "I didn't understand what I was signing." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You didn't do anything wrong, Emily. This is on him." The final file was a series of financial records, meticulously cataloging Daniel's schemes. The sheer scope of his fraud was staggering, implicating several high-profile individuals. Ava's brow furrowed as she scanned the data. "This isn't just blackmail material," she said. This is evidence that could put Daniel away for a long time. Emily exhaled, her resolve hardening. Then that's exactly what we'll do. He's hurt too many people for too long. It's time to put an end to it. The next morning, Ethan and Ava met with their legal team to prepare the evidence for the authorities. Meanwhile, Emily called Sophie to thank her again for coming forward. "You've given me the chance to finally put this behind me," Emily said. Sophie's voice trembled with emotion. "I just hope it helps. You deserve to move on, Emily." 2 days later, the Walkers held a press conference. Standing side by side, Ethan and Emily addressed the media with calm confidence. "We've uncovered evidence of fraudulent activities tied to someone from Emily's past," Ethan began. "This individual attempted to use her name to further his schemes. But we want to be clear, Emily was a victim of manipulation, not a willing participant." Emily stepped forward, her voice steady. "For years, I allowed fear to control me. But today, I'm choosing courage. This foundation was built on the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. And now, we're proving that transparency and truth are the strongest foundations of all." The press conference was met with overwhelming support. Public sentiment rallied behind Emily, praising her bravery in confronting her past and holding those who wronged her accountable. Later that evening, as the family gathered in the estate's garden to celebrate the turning point, Clara toddled over to Emily with a flower in her tiny hand. "For Mama," she said with a giggle. Emily knelt down, taking the flower as tears filled her eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered, pulling Clara into a hug. Ethan joined her, wrapping his arms around them both. "You've faced every challenge with strength and grace," he said. "And now, it's finally behind us." Emily looked up at him, her heart full. "Because we did it together," she said. As the family laughed and talked under the stars, the weight of the past began to fade, replaced by the promise of a future built on love, resilience, and unwavering unity. Months passed, and the shadow of Daniel's schemes faded into a distant memory. The evidence provided to the authorities led to a high-profile trial, where Daniel faced the consequences of his actions. Emily attended the hearings with Ethan by her side, a symbol of her resilience and determination to protect what they had built. With the trial behind them, the Walkers shifted their focus entirely to the future. The foundation, now thriving, had expanded its reach, opening shelters in multiple cities and launching programs that touched thousands of lives. Emily, as its heart and soul, became a celebrated figure, a symbol of how strength and hope could transform even the darkest pasts. One crisp autumn morning, the family gathered at a new shelter opening in the heart of the city. The building, a blend of modern architecture and welcoming warmth, bore a plaque at its entrance, the Clara Walker Center for New Beginnings. Emily stood before a crowd of supporters, donors, and individuals who had been directly impacted by the foundation's work. Ethan, Matthew, and Robert were in the front row, Clara sitting on her grandfather's lap, clapping her tiny hands enthusiastically. Emily took a deep breath, her heart full as she began her speech. "This center is more than a building," she said. "It's a promise that no one will ever feel alone in their struggles. Every person who walks through these doors will find more than shelter. They'll find a community that believes in them, just as I was lucky enough to find in my own life." Her voice faltered slightly as she glanced at her family, her eyes meeting Ethan's. "I'm standing here today because of love, resilience, and the unwavering support of people who believed in me. And now, it's my turn to pass that belief on to others." The crowd erupted in applause as Emily stepped down, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. Ethan met her at the podium, wrapping her in a tight embrace. "You're incredible," he whispered. "So are you," she replied, her smile radiant. After the ceremony, the family returned to the estate, where they hosted a small celebration for the staff and volunteers who had worked tirelessly to make the foundation's expansion possible. Clara darted between the guests, giggling as she showed off her newest trick, climbing onto chairs unassisted. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the family gathered in the garden. Robert, who had grown visibly more relaxed and content in recent months, raised a glass. To Emily, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. You've reminded this family, and the world, what it means to persevere. You've given us purpose beyond wealth and status. And you've built a legacy that will outlive us all. Tears shimmered in Emily's eyes as the family toasted. Matthew, who had grown into a dependable and thoughtful ally, clinked his glass against hers with a genuine smile. You've changed all of us, you know, he said softly. Emily shook her head. We've all changed each other. Later that night, as the guests departed and the estate grew quiet, Emily and Ethan sat on the balcony, watching the stars. Clara had fallen asleep in her crib, her peaceful breathing a comforting rhythm in the background. We've come so far, Ethan said, his voice filled with wonder. Emily nodded, leaning against him. And there's still so much more to do. But for the first time, I'm not afraid of what's ahead. I know we can face anything, together. Ethan smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. To our future, he said. To our future, Emily echoed. As they sat beneath the vast night sky, their hands intertwined, Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her journey had been one of pain, growth, and triumph, and it had led her here, to a life rich with love, purpose, and endless possibilities. The past no longer held power over her. Instead, it had become the foundation of a legacy that would inspire generations to come.